I saw the bubbles in my champagne before I saw my father's hand. The glass caught the rooftop lights and tilted toward the skyline. And in that glittering second, I caught it a faint swirl, a milky eddy where there should have been nothing but gold. My heart didn't pound or break. It went cold and clinical, the way it does when a scientist looks through a microscope and recognizes a terrible shape. My father smiled his public smile. My mother perfected her society tilt of the chin, and I understood this was not a celebration. It was the clean, elegant stage for a crime. My name is Danielle Harris. I was 22 the day I graduated from Northwestern with a biochemistry degree and a minor I never wanted but negotiated into, and I wore my robe like armor as I walked into a war I hadn't declared. The Harris family had money polished across multiple generations. My mother, Eleanor, came from old pharmaceutical names that glittered on museum walls and gala programs, and my father, Joseph, took a lean research operation and grew it into Harris Pharmaceuticals, a company whispered about in trade journals for its speed and ruthlessness. My sister, Sophia, was the air people photographed Harvard Business School. Perfect posture, a mind like a ledger. At dinner, when Sophia spoke, the table listened. When I spoke, my father's newspaper rustled like a curtain dropping between us. The plan for my life had been drafted before my first lab report. I was to join the family business, slide into research leadership, and keep our name unrumpled in white coats and press releases while Sophia helmed the deals. I disappointed the plan by falling in love with rivers and wetlands, with data that told the truth about water taking secrets downstream, with environmental science that did not flatter investors. Tree hugger nonsense, my father called it, and my mother edited my defiance into a tone problem. Northwestern offered a compromise biochemistry disciplined enough to please them, environmental work honest enough to keep me breathing. By my junior year, I stopped taking their calls and took out loans. I learned how to make coffee at 2 a.m. and how to swallow guilt at 8. There was one person who had loved the way I loved the world. My grandmother Lillian, my mother's mother, a brilliant chemist who had spent too many years publishing under her husband's name. Left behind a trust many assumed would pour straight back into the family. Instead, she wrote my name into it, ironclad and independent funds to be released when I turned 23 or graduated, whichever came last. When my parents' attorney let the details slip 3 months before commencement, my father's face, I'm told, turned the color of paper. $12 million would guarantee my career could exist beyond the leash of Harris Pharmaceuticals. It also placed a price tag on my life. The morning of graduation was bright and ruthless. At 9:30, a car service arrived because my mother believed punctuality photographed well. And outside the auditorium, my father scrolled his emails while my mother inventoried my hair. Sophia stood a few paces away, her smile surprisingly soft, like a person stepping out of a portrait. Taylor and Zoe, my friends who had become an alternate definition of family, swept in with caps askew and a joy that made the air feel breathable. We filed to our seats. We listened to declarations about futures. And when Danielle Elizabeth Harris, summa cum laude, rang through the room at 11:07 a.m., my friends cheered with ferocity while my parents clapped the way executives clap at quarterly meetings. Afterward, the car flew us through Chicago to the peninsula's rooftop terrace, transformed into a cathedral of excess ice gleaming, flowers cascading, an orchestra laying satin over the skyline. Quite the production, said Dr. Lewis, once my father's research partner and now a Northwestern mentor who knew how to speak caution without sounding like doom. His voice dipped. There are rumors, clinical irregularities, an FDA chill in the air. He didn't say, "Be careful," but the words floated between us like a hovering drone. My parents watched me the way strategists watch an acquisition. Wherever I moved, their attention moved as if we were connected by invisible string. I slipped down a service hall to breathe and found their voices around a corner, low and urgent. I did not want to hear. I could not stop hearing. My mother's question was a tremor. Was this necessary? My father's answer was a scalpel. The investigation is accelerating. She has enough money to turn crusader. We cannot risk it, just enough to make her sick, enough to stall the trust. Do you want to lose everything? I pressed my back to cold tile. The words separated from meaning, then fused back together with clarity I wished belonged to some other woman. A compound designed to look like bad shrimp. A hospital stay to buy time. Paperwork moved while I grew pale under fluorescent lights. He was a scientist. He knew doses and half-lives and plausible deniability. I washed my hands for longer than necessary and watched the water slide off my wrists as if it might carry panic down the drain. When I returned to the party, I looked at the champagne the way a diver looks at a calm surface hiding a riptide. 15 minutes before the toast, my father instructed the staff to open a special gold-labeled bottle for family only, his smile tipping shiny over the word family. He positioned one flute slightly apart and hovered with the crisp patience of a man who believes he is inevitable. I crossed to Taylor and Zoe and asked them to film the toast. I kept my voice light. I kept my hands from trembling. Just get my father in frame, I said, the way a director might say it, the way a daughter might not. Glasses lifted. My mother glided into her public tenderness, and my father spoke of determination with the practiced cadence of a man translating disapproval into tribute. He handed me my flute himself. Clouded sediment winked at the bottom like a secret. In the clockwork turn of a single breath, I made a choice I will spend the rest of my life examining. I smiled, pivoted toward Sophia, and offered her my glass in a sisterly flourish, trading it for hers with the smoothness of etiquette. To family, I said, and the word felt less like a toast than a knife balanced on its edge. Sophia drank deeply from the glass my father had placed into my hand. I lifted hers instead, safe, untouched, and kept my eyes locked on his face as if tethering him to the truth. The world didn't stop for the switch. Guests clapped politely. The orchestra began another swell, and servers moved among us with practiced smiles. But beneath the tablecloths and floral arrangements, something irreversible had happened. My father's eyes flickered from triumph to horror in less than a second, and my mother's brittle smile froze like glass about to shatter. I drifted through the celebration afterward as though wearing someone else's skin. My friends laughed. Guests congratulated me. Dr. Lewis raised his glass again, and all the while my stomach coiled with dread. Sophia looked radiant, unaware of what rested in her veins. She was the golden daughter, the Harris exemplar, and for once she drank from the cup meant for me. I told myself the dose was meant to sicken, not kill, but the voice sounded like cowardice even inside my own head. What if my father had lied? What if she became collateral damage in a plan designed to erase me? The answer came 34 minutes later. Across the terrace, Sophia pressed her hand to her temple, her posture slipping for the first time in years. I heard her voice, strained and unfamiliar. I feel strange, really dizzy. She swayed, then folded, her knees buckling as the crowd gasped. The junior associate beside her caught her awkwardly, calling for help. My mother screamed. My father dropped the mask, and the orchestra faltered into silence. I rushed forward as Sophia's skin drained to gray and her words dissolved into incoherence. The symptoms were textbook anticholinergic poisoning, rapid heart rate, confusion, tremors, exactly what I had feared. Chaos erupted. My mother's cries carried across the rooftop, shrill and desperate now that her perfect heir was on the floor. My father shouted for an ambulance, cradling Sophia with a desperation that might have seemed paternal if I hadn't overheard him minutes earlier discussing her fate in abstract terms. Doctor. Lewis knelt beside her, loosening her collar, confirming her pulse, his voice calm against the storm. I forced myself to be clinical, to observe and memorize. Every symptom, every minute mattered. Taylor and Zoe pressed through the crowd to my side, panic in their eyes. I whispered instructions fast and low, send the recording to my email, give a copy to the paramedics, and tell them poisoning. They stared at me in disbelief, but they did it. In the lobby, 5 minutes later, I intercepted the emergency crew. My sister collapsed upstairs. I told the lead paramedic. Symptoms began 30 minutes after champagne consumption. Irregular pulse, dizziness, tremors. I suspect a toxic compound. His eyes sharpened at the specificity, but he didn't question. When my parents appeared, dragging Sophia half-conscious between them, the gurney was ready. Numbers were called out: blood pressure 90/60, pulse 120 and erratic. My mother sobbed mascara into her hands. My father's fury burned through his silence. As they loaded Sophia into the ambulance, he hissed at me. "What did you do?" I answered evenly. She drank from my glass. "Remember the special bottle you selected?" The vein at his temple pulsed, his jaw locked, but he said nothing more as my mother climbed in beside Sophia. He ordered me into the car. "We'll follow." At Northwestern Memorial, chaos sharpened into procedure. Sophia was rushed behind double doors, monitors chirping. My mother clung to doctors with frantic devotion. My father argued with staff, and I walked to the nurse's station with a scientist's steadiness. "You need to test for cyclopentylate derivatives," I said firmly. "Modified compounds from Harris Pharmaceuticals. They won't show on standard screens." Minutes later, I was in a consultation room with Detective Rivera, a woman whose calm voice cut sharper than my father's fury. She listened as I explained the switch, the recording, the trust, the motive. "So your parents had reason to believe your inheritance endangered their control," she summarized. "And your father has access to research compounds outside standard detection." I nodded. "And you knowingly handed the glass to your sister." My throat closed. I thought it was non-lethal. I needed evidence. I didn't know what else to do. Dr. Patel, the ER physician, arrived with preliminary toxicology. Elevated levels of a modified anticholinergic, research grade, consistent with what I suspected. Sophia was serious but stable. Relief loosened my knees, but Rivera's gaze pinned me. "You realize this means your father attempted to poison you," she said. "And by your own admission, your sister consumed it." Before I could answer, the door burst open. My father stormed in with his attorney, Gerald Thorne, the man who had drafted countless Harris contracts. "My daughter is unstable," my father declared, his voice calm now, rehearsed, jealous, resentful. "She's spinning fantasies." Thorne slid a card across the table. "My clients will cooperate." All further questions threw me. Detective Rivera pocketed it with the distaste of someone picking up evidence from a crime scene. My father's eyes lingered on me, a cold promise radiating from their depths. Sophia regained consciousness hours later. Her first words to me were a raspy whisper. "Did Dad really try to poison you?" I could only nod, my hand squeezing hers. She blinked, trying to reconcile the truth with years of devotion. Why I told her about the trust, about the investigation into contaminated water near the West facility, about the reports I suspected they had buried. Her eyes widened. I saw those files last month. Heavy metals? Disposal logs? I thought they were routine. Her voice trembled. They've been dumping waste for years. Before we could speak further, Detective Rivera entered with another officer. The FBI has been investigating Harris Pharmaceuticals for 6 months. She announced, fraud, environmental violations, falsified data. Tonight's incident just accelerated everything. Sophia closed her eyes, tears leaking onto the pillow. I defended them. I believed in them. I held her hand tighter. They lied to both of us. But now we tell the truth. The Harris empire cracked within hours. Search warrants executed, offices raided, documents seized. Our parents, pillars of Chicago society, were suddenly suspects in crimes that extended far beyond the poisoned champagne glass. And as I sat at my sister's bedside, guilt gnawed at me. I had switched the glasses. I had made the choice. But I also knew one fact as clearly as any lab result my father had intended me to fall. The story broke like glass shattering on marble. By the next morning, the Chicago Tribune headline screamed about attempted murder and pharmaceutical corruption. The names, Joseph and Eleanor Harris, once synonymous with philanthropy and influence, now dripped with scandal. Cameras crowded the hospital entrance. Reporters pressed for statements, and relatives I hadn't heard from in years began to call. I moved into Taylor and Zoe's apartment to escape the chaos. Sophia, still weak, stayed under the care of our Aunt Patricia, who flew in from Seattle and muttered, I always knew Eleanor was capable of terrible things. But this, her voice trailed into disbelief. The FBI wasted no time. They cataloged boxes of files from the Harris offices, seized computers, and traced emails showing systematic falsification of clinical data. Environmental inspectors tested the soil and water around the West facility and found toxic waste leaching into the watershed. The cleanup costs alone were estimated at over $100 million. The charges against my parents multiplied daily fraud, conspiracy, environmental crimes, and attempted murder. The glamorous facade of Harris Pharmaceuticals dissolved under fluorescent interrogation lights. Detective Rivera kept me updated. She showed me lab results confirming the compound in Sophia's blood was a modified anticholinergic from my father's private research lab. He had personally signed it out 3 days before graduation. His notes, discovered in a locked drawer, included dosage calculations. He wasn't improvising, she said grimly. He planned this with precision. I wanted to feel vindicated, but all I felt was exhaustion. Every time I pictured Sophia collapsing, the guilt hit me like a tide. I had put the poisoned glass in her hand. Even if my father had created the trap, it was my decision that made her the one who fell. As the investigation deepened, I met with Special Agent Donovan from the FBI. He spread photographs across a table, images of a storage unit rented under my name, filled with incriminating documents, laptops, and vials of experimental compounds. My breath caught. That's not mine. I've never been there. Donovan nodded. We believe your parents forged the paperwork. This was Plan C. If the poisoning failed, they could frame you for espionage. My stomach twisted. They had been preparing for months, weaving contingencies where I was always the problem to eliminate. The trust fund made me a liability, but my independence made me dangerous. Sophia, recovering slowly, began to realize the depth of her own entanglement. I signed off on some of those reports, She admitted to me, tears streaking her face. Father said they were regulatory filings. I trusted him completely. She shook with anger at herself, but I took her hand. They used you as their shield. You were the obedient daughter. The proof everything was fine. I was the rebel, so they could dismiss me as unstable. Neither of us ever had a choice. It was strange, forging sisterhood out of betrayal. But in the hospital room's quiet, our bond strengthened into something real. The preliminary hearing arrived 2 weeks later. Sophia and I walked past reporters into the courthouse, our parents sitting stiff at the defense table in tailored suits. The prosecution presented the video of the champagne toast, the toxicology reports, the financial records showing motive. They even played a recorded phone call from my father in detention, asking a colleague to clean up the situation with those river samples and sneering that I had never understood family loyalty. My mother broke down in theatrical sobs. My father stared straight ahead, stone-faced. The judge ruled there was more than enough evidence for trial. Reporters swarmed us outside, demanding to know if Sophia had known about the glass switch. She surprised me by stopping, fire in her eyes. My sister saved my life. She declared, "Our parents tried to kill her. That's the truth you should be telling." For the first time, Sophia spoke not as the perfect Harris heir, but as my ally. In the following weeks, family skeletons fell from closets faster than the FBI could gather them. An estranged uncle surfaced with his own whistleblower story from decades ago. Former employees described intimidation, firings, and safety data buried under threats. Families filed lawsuits over loved ones lost to drugs Harris Pharmaceuticals had knowingly pushed to market. The empire my parents built revealed itself as a house of poisoned cards. Meanwhile, Sophia and I began to chart a new course. We hired attorney Vivian Santos, sharp-eyed and unflinching, to guide us through the legal labyrinth. "Your grandmother's trust is secure," she assured me. "The funds will transfer within weeks. As for your parents' assets, most will go toward restitution. But you and your sister may still inherit substantial holdings unless you refuse them." Sophia and I exchanged a look, both of us recoiling at the thought. "We need time," I said. The summer blurred with FBI meetings, depositions, and community outrage. Yet slowly, Sophia and I reclaimed small pieces of ourselves. She resigned from Harris Pharmaceuticals, disgust etched in her every word, and began considering law school. I reached out to environmental firms, using my biochemistry background to propose remediation projects for pharmaceutical waste. It felt like redemption to wield science not for profit, but for healing. Together, we visited our grandmother's old lake house, a refuge untouched by Harris opulence. There, in the quiet glow of sunset, we began to imagine lives defined not by our parents' empire, but by our own choices. But as the trial loomed, the government offered plea deals: 20 years for my father, 15 for my mother if she testified. Sophia and I sat by the lake with mugs of cocoa, weighing vengeance against closure. "Part of me wants them to face a full trial," she admitted. "To have everything exposed?" I nodded. "And part of you wants it over." We both understood. Their crimes deserved daylight, but so did our futures. For the first time in our lives, we realized we could decide without them. 7 months after the champagne toast, our parents stood in a courtroom to accept their plea deals. The grand hall smelled faintly of varnished wood and stale perfume, and rows of spectators leaned forward to witness the downfall of Joseph and Eleanor Harris. My mother, elegant even in muted attire, wept softly as the charges were read: attempted murder, fraud, environmental crimes, falsified data. My father remained rigid, his jaw carved from stone, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond the judge. When asked if he had anything to say, I half hoped for an apology, a trace of remorse. Instead, he launched into a speech about his lifetime of contributions to medical science, insisting he had always done what was necessary to protect the business. Not once did he mention the communities poisoned, the patients harmed, or his daughters betrayed. In his narrative, he was still the martyr of progress, not the architect of ruin. When the gavel fell, sentencing them to years behind bars, I felt a cocktail of emotions surge through me. Relief washed strongest. It was over. My parents would never again hover over my life with sharp smiles and sharper threats. Sadness lingered, too, for the family that never existed beyond appearances, and anger burned at their refusal to admit guilt. But mostly, I felt free, as if a chain around my chest had been quietly unlocked. Outside, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust into our faces. Sophia surprised everyone again by stepping forward, her voice clear and unwavering. My sister and I are cooperating fully with the authorities. Our parents tried to poison Danielle to protect their crimes. That is the truth. The only people responsible are Joseph and Eleanor Harris. Her words cut through the clamor, redirecting the story away from speculation about sibling rivalry to the undeniable facts of parental betrayal. For once, Sophia wasn't the heir defending the family name. She was defending me. In the months that followed, Sophia and I dismantled the remnants of the Harris Empire together. We sold off personal assets, directing much of the proceeds toward victim compensation funds. We kept our grandmother's lake house, the one place where love had once lived, and made it our shared refuge. Reporters eventually moved on to fresher scandals, leaving us the anonymity we craved. My grandmother's trust transferred fully, and I used part of it to establish a foundation dedicated to environmental testing and healthcare for communities poisoned by industrial waste. My own career found its footing at an environmental remediation firm, where my research into pharmaceutical waste remediation was welcomed. For the first time, my skills weren't tools for corporate deception. They were instruments of repair. Sophia enrolled in law school, determined to specialize in environmental law and corporate accountability. I spent my life defending them. She told me one night at the lake house dock, her voice steady over the ripple of water. Now I want to defend the people they harmed. Her golden child facade had crumbled, but what rose in its place was stronger her own identity, unshaped by parental approval. We revisited the past only when necessary. Walking through our childhood home under FBI supervision felt like touring a mausoleum of lies. Among the seized items, agents found a journal in my grandmother's delicate handwriting. In it, she recorded decades of observations about the company, her concerns about safety, and her fear that her daughter and son-in-law would continue the cycle of ambition and cruelty. Her last entry, written shortly before her death, broke me open. I have arranged for Danielle's financial independence. She alone has the conscience and strength to break the cycle of this family's poison. Tears blurred the ink as I read it to Sophia. Our grandmother had seen the truth long before either of us dared to name it. She had tried to protect me, and in some unexpected way, she had saved us both. Life after betrayal was not clean or easy. There were nights when I woke gasping, seeing again the cloud at the bottom of my glass. Days when guilt gnawed at me for switching flutes with my sister. But gradually, healing stitched itself together in small acts: water testing at the lake, community meetings where residents thanked me for helping uncover contamination, late-night talks with Sophia where laughter replaced silence. We had been raised in a house built on control, deception, and image. Now we were building a life rooted in truth. 1 year after graduation, I stood at a podium addressing a conference on pharmaceutical environmental impact. My hands shook slightly as I spoke about innovative remediation methods, but when I glanced into the audience, I saw Sophia recording with pride, Dr. Lewis nodding encouragement, Taylor and Zoe waving from the back. For the first time, I felt surrounded not by obligation, but by belonging. My parents had tried to poison my body and my spirit, to reduce me to silence or compliance. But in resisting, in choosing truth over loyalty, I had found a strength that was mine alone. I ended my talk with words I meant not just for scientists, but for anyone listening. Blood may tie us to family, but it does not entitle anyone to harm us. Sometimes, the most loving families are the ones we create ourselves. The most powerful antidote to poison, whether chemical or emotional, is truth. The applause that followed was thunderous, but it was the quiet smile from my sister that carried the most weight. Together, we had broken free. Together, we had begun again. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment about your own journey through family struggles or finding strength when it mattered most. Your stories matter too.